this desire, this hunger, this interest, and it's just a feeling that he has. It's not a choice to have that feeling or not. It's just there.
You know, you hear a lot of different theories about where people think that it originated from.
Science can help to clarify some of the empirical facts that is the territory in which we're working, but it doesn't settle the moral issues.
We continue our discussion about sex, homosexuality, and the Catholic Church by exploring what science can tell us about homosexuality. Our first program in this series featured personal stories of people like me, people who experience same-sex attraction. Each journey is uniquely different, but we all once lived out our desires for homosexual intimacy or identified ourselves as gay before a transformation of heart and mind led us to seek a life of chastity. In our second program, we talked about the divine design of sexuality, where genital expression, sex, is reserved for a man and woman within marriage. And we explored the idea of identity, our most important identity being a child of God created in His image and likeness. So science, what does science have to say about all this anyway? To find out, we've talked to psychological experts to have them explain what is going on up here in our head. But this discussion must also include the physical and medical information about our sexuality. All of these aspects of life, integrated with our spirituality, make up the total person, body, mind, and soul. In Psalm 139, the psalmist writes that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are complex beings with many questions. Good science, when grounded in the proper understanding about who we are and who we are meant to be, helps begin to answer questions about our identity. Science can help us better understand ourselves. It can even help identify particular difficulties that keep us from truly fulfilling human relationships and a more intimate relationship with Christ, the joy of life He wants to share with us.
The documents of the Church that address homosexuality indicate that there is a proper place for the psychological sciences in the question of homosexual inclination and homosexual behavior. The mental health profession, good psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, counselors who share Christian anthropology can help someone understand why there is a difficulty in living the virtue of chastity.
Exploring the complexity of homosexuality and how it can impact the lives of same-sex attracted men and women is the driving force behind the work of people like Dr. Stanton Jones and Dr. Janelle Hallman. A clinical psychologist by training, Dr. Jones is a respected researcher and professor of psychology who writes extensively about human sexuality. Dr. Hallman founded and directs a faith-based counseling center. She is also a professor, author, and popular speaker with a particular concern for people experiencing a same-sex attraction, especially women. Both of these mental health professionals rely on the social sciences to help them better understand homosexuality, yet always keeping in mind the unique journey, search for identity, and direction of each person's life.
So this journey of figuring out who they are, how they're going to live, who is going to continue to be their friend, sometimes takes years and years and years. And it is because of watching people do this journey that my heart really grew in compassion for men and women with same-sex attraction, understanding that their lives, they have a burden that most of us do not have.
It's made up of individuals who each of whom have their own story. And as a Christian, I would argue that the only universal story is the gospel story. Science gives us hints and indications about the things that affect our finite being, but it is the gospel that is truly universal, and it is the story into which all of us are called to fit our stories.
The gospel is the story into which all of us are called to fit our stories. Dr. Jones raises a critical issue here, especially given the moral climate in today's society. Many contemporary voices are demanding that the church must change her message to fit shifting cultural norms, particularly when it comes to issues of life and sexual activity. Often, those with same-sex attraction will simply say, "Look, I was born this way," making it a foregone conclusion that they have to act on these desires. But are we born this way?
When I hear someone say, "I've always been this way," or "I was born that way," I think there's something there that has to be listened to. There's a part of a person's story that you need to hear. What people don't take into account, though, is the fact that the best research about memory and about identity shows that we construct our memories and we construct our identities.
There are a lot of studies that are exploring this, and there seems to be some genetic or biological influence, but the researchers themselves admit that whatever genetic factor it is or biological factor, it's not clearly understood what it is and how it influences a person's same-sex sexuality.
The best study that's been done yet was done by a scientist named Langstrom. Langstrom looked at the identical twin database in the nation of Sweden, and he identified 71 identical twin male pairs where they're genetically identical individuals. And in these 71 pairs, at least one of the co-twins, one of the twin pair, was gay. And the amazing finding that Langstrom came up with was that in only 7 cases out of the 71 was the second twin also gay. So in 64 of the cases, the twins did not match for sexual orientation. I think the best research suggests that there's a genetic push that's there for some people on average. So this brings up the whole question of whether predisposition equals predetermination. And it appears that there is a tendency that can be there for some individuals, a tendency to be pushed in that direction, but it's a push that doesn't determine the outcomes of your life. So some people may have a leaning in that direction, but that leaves a lot to be said about what is going to happen in their lives.
There is a pretty much common belief, even in school textbooks on a graduate level, that claim that homosexuality is genetic or biologically based and you're born gay. And I find this very interesting because even the American Psychological Association claims that there's no conclusive evidence at this point that homosexuality is purely genetic or biological.
In its statement about homosexuality, the American Psychological Association says, "No findings have emerged that permit scientists to conclude that sexual orientation is determined by any particular factor or factors. Many think that nature and nurture both play complex roles."
What I do know, after working with a lot of people with same-sex attraction, is that this is a very complex experience. It is complex, it is multifaceted.
I think probably the biggest thing for me as I've thought about it was a lot of just being different from my peers, growing up.
I think it's safe to say that those with same-sex attraction have, at one time or another, asked themselves the question, how did I get this way? The answers are often very elusive.
From a scientific perspective, the causation of homosexuality in general is still quite mysterious. There's still realms and realms of things that we don't understand. And we understand a little bit on average that this may contribute a little bit of this and this may contribute a little bit of that. But generally speaking, we don't know the origins of the phenomenon. But there's actually good evidence out there of sociocultural variables having to do with the family and the culture contributing. Studies of large swaths of populations that have shown that homosexuality is associated with, for instance, having grown up in a single-parent home. There's also issues of education, of location in urban environments, and those sorts of things. The phenomenon of father absent, particularly, that can be a variable.
Most of the women that I've worked with over the years have wanted to understand why same-sex attraction is in their life and have done incredible, deep soul-seeking. Some of them know that their gender nonconformity. They grew up feeling more like a boy. They played with the boys. They never really had girlfriends. They never fit in with the girls. And a lot of my clients believe that this need to still understand their femininity, this need to be connected with other girls who were like them, led them into a pretty deep hunger during adolescence, where they were feeling very, very alone and wanting that best friend that they never had. And it was often that best friendship that turned sexual at some point that actually was the opening the door to same-sex sexuality for them.
And one of the things that is least talked about in the literature today is the occurrence of sexual abuse and sexual experimentation in childhood. I think it needs to be said immediately that there are many gay and lesbian people who have never experienced sexual abuse in their childhood. But in our own study that we did, it was very striking that in our population of 98 people, over 50% had experienced some sort of abusive sexual relationship earlier in their life, before age 13, before puberty. These kinds of findings are sort of off the charts in terms of not being something that people want to talk about. It's not everybody's experience, but I do think that these kinds of experiences in the lives of some individuals can contribute to the development of same-sex attraction and identity.
A lot of women report sexual abuse experiences where they know that in that moment they slammed the door forever to ever open their heart again to a man, to ever trust a man, which essentially just kind of closed off thinking about intimacy with a man. And they felt much safer with females. They weren't afraid of being exploited by a woman. They came to believe that all men want is sex, and that was not what all they wanted. They wanted emotional connection. And so they just found themselves feeling much more open, much more safe, and much more attracted to other females. More than twice as many homosexual women report childhood sexual abuse than heterosexual women. So again, its correlation or those kind of prevalent studies can't determine whether it's causal, but there's something that we need to consider, that there's something going on in the experience. Over the years in working with men and women with same-sex attraction, I've seen some patterns and quite a bit of similarity. So a lot of the women that I've worked with over the years tend to have interests and abilities that are often classified as man or masculine. And a lot of the men that I've worked with are also gender nonconforming in that they've tended to be drawn to art, to beauty, to music, to poetry.
I just didn't really have the same interests as really a lot of the other guys. I was into more of like the arts and stuff and didn't really like sports too much or anything.
But what I do see in terms of a big difference is that women, in terms of experiencing same-sex attraction, their relationships often emerge out of a best friendship, where they meet a woman, they are kindred souls, they really like each other, and they feel this closeness. I know that many men do experience something similar to that, but often what I will hear more from the men is that they will see a man at a distance and be physically drawn to him. They will be sexually aroused by just the physical physique or the attractiveness of that man. And so often their relationships then are, the foundation is sexual behavior, whereas for the female connection point is that emotional relationship. Something that's interesting right now in the literature is the discovery that this younger generation of men and women are experiencing what is being called as sexual fluidity. And what this means is that a young person will call themselves gay or lesbian for a certain amount of time and then experience opposite sex attraction and enter into a relationship with the other sex and experience then other sex behavior, and at that point will label themselves as heterosexual, and then months later are drawn again to somebody of the same sex, and so will actually change their sexual identity label back to lesbian or maybe bisexual. It's very frustrating to me that young people are so encouraged, overly encouraged, to just assume a sexual identity label immediately before they've even completed the process of sexual identity development.
The American Psychological Association, in a brief before the Supreme Court, said the following: extensive psychological research conducted over almost 3 decades has conclusively established that homosexuality is not related to psychological adjustment or maladjustment. That's a very strong statement. And what's really remarkable about that statement, and the statements that the MyAPA and the American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations have been saying for decades, is that the empirical evidence consistently points in the opposite direction. What they're saying is just simply not true. And the problem is that this is a true misrepresentation of what the data really says. A much better representation is something that was published in a prominent medical journal, a journal that looked at epidemiology, or the way that that mental health disorders spread themselves over populations, said the following as a conclusion of a massive study of tens of thousands of people, that homosexual orientation is associated with a general elevation of risk for anxiety, mood, and substance use disorders, and for suicidal thoughts and plans. Time and time again, what you see is a documentation of a proclivity, a tendency towards various types of serious mental health concerns on average in aspects of the gay community. The evidence is very clear in terms of suicidality of teens that when a person experiences same-sex attraction, they're 2 or 3 or 4 times more likely to entertain suicidal thoughts.
It was actually around that time when I was 15 years old, I tried to commit suicide, and I gave a suicide note to a guy that I was in love with, I put in brackets. So I was very upset, obviously, and in turmoil over it, only because I could only see a life of darkness, you know.
Now, how we explain that is a very difficult puzzle. The secular mental health community very much wants to say that the problem is acceptance, and with a lack of acceptance comes stigmatization, and that it's when people are stigmatized by an unaccepting community that they experience these kinds of problems.
I think in general, every person who has same-sex attraction goes through some phase of experiencing great shame. But it's for those who have grown up in the church or who are very active in the church who then discover that they have same-sex attraction. I think they have possibly what I would call compounding shame. Many of my clients over the years, the only thing that they ever heard about homosexuality was that it was sin, that it was wrong, that it was detestable in God's eyes. That is all many people, in fact, have ever heard about homosexuality. And I can't even imagine carrying those words and attempting to still stay close to God and figure out my life.
Now, I think stigmatization is a real phenomenon, and that's why I think Christians need to join together and say that we don't believe in bullying either. But the problem with blaming all of the mental health issues on stigmatization is that when you move the research to communities that are demonstrably very accepting for homosexuality, you tend to get pretty much the same levels of mental health problems in those communities as in others. So the studies, for instance, in the Netherlands, where there's been a much more widespread acceptance of gays and lesbians in those communities, the mental health statistics are basically the same. And to me, that suggests that stigmatization may be a real phenomenon, that the phenomenon of being unaccepted, it really is hard on people, but there's something else going on.
With all of the challenges facing those of us who experience same-sex attraction, many seek out professional support from psychologists and counselors. What kind of help can we expect to get?
I think that the mental health professional's primary role is to provide a safe place that youth and men and women with same-sex attraction can simply just come and own their truth, be able to talk to somebody about what they feel, about what they experience, about what they believe about themselves, about what they know about sexuality in general.
I think that the mental health community can be of tremendous help to individuals who are struggling with these problems, and that it's very useful pastorally to avail themselves of those resources.
Two Catholic mental health professionals, Dr. Timothy Locke, a psychologist, and Dr. Bill Consiglio, have years of experience working with men and women who are seeking help with issues connected to same-sex attraction. Some of their insights may give us a better picture on the value of what mental health professionals can provide.
They came to me saying, I have a problem, I have same-sex attraction, and I don't want to act on it. And some of them said, I have same-sex attraction and I don't want to have it. I want to get rid of that. And so I began to meet with the guys and to assess their goals.
My goal is to help you resolve this within the framework of your Christian values, your biblical faithfulness, your Catholic faith, and to help you live a chaste life, manage your sexual behavior, and to help you spiritually grow throughout this whole process.
They're struggling with so many different things on so many different levels. There's certainly the problem within themselves that they're battling with.
You're getting at this thing emotionally. So that certainly helps. But that's not the only thing. You want to start helping the person create some new behavior.
They've come in distraught. They've come in acting out. They've come in same-sex relationships. They've come in completely torn apart from their lifestyle and from the internal struggles within. And it is incredibly rewarding to sit and work with these people who are so honest and they're so real. It's profound to see the pain that they're in when they begin counseling. And then as we work through various issues and as we see change in their life. And by that I mean changing from an unchaste lifestyle to a chaste lifestyle.
In addition to our minds, we can consider what the medical sciences tell us about our bodies and the physical effects of homosexual activity. Medical care can be a special challenge in a culture where homosexual life is often viewed as simply another choice. Caregivers on the front lines know it's a choice often with serious effects.
Complacency and a false sense of personal safety and health may be the most challenging conditions Dr. Timothy Flanagan struggles with each day. As a recognized expert in infectious diseases like HIV/AIDS, his practice includes a number of men who are actively engaged in homosexual activity, many with multiple partners. What he reads in professional medical journals and sees played out daily in the lives of those he treats in the exam room is a grave concern.
You know, unfortunately, we're told, particularly in the media, that casual sex is totally fine. You know, particularly, if it's consensual and it's safe, no problems. Part of this is because we've done so well treating HIV that the death rate from AIDS has fallen dramatically, which is so important and so good. Data from the CDC showed that the number of new infections has gone down by about 30% between 2002 and 2011. Wonderful. We're really, pleased as can be about that. But the greatest decrease has been among heterosexual transmission of HIV. And HIV transmission among men having sex with men, so that's bisexual and gay men, has not gone down, which is of grave concern. It's a big deal. And what that showed is that the greatest increase in new HIV infections are among younger men having sex with men, over 100% increase from 2002 to 2011. And it's because people have thought, oh, this is not a problem. So it's complacency, it's not a problem. The other issue, which has really been tough, is it's not just HIV. We've seen other sexually transmitted diseases explode. So there's a big epidemic of syphilis. And people go, whoa, syphilis? Syphilis has disappeared. That's an old disease from, I don't know, turn of the century or Middle Ages or Victorian era. And that's not the case. So syphilis rates in the United States have more than doubled. 90% of the syphilis now is among men, and 80%, more than 80%, is among men who have sex with men. And syphilis is bad. It can go to the brain, it can go to the heart, it can go throughout the whole body. People can get very ill from it. There are other infections. We've seen human papillomavirus, there's anal carcinoma. These are really big concerns for us, particularly because disease transmission occurs so efficiently when you have lots of sex with lots of partners. We've also seen gonorrhea or GC, including drug-resistant gonorrhea. We've seen chlamydia. So there have been a number of new cases of hepatitis C transmitted sexually between men having sex with men. And so the pain and the trauma there is terrible. And of course the damage can be physical. That could be new HIV infection, and some of this is related to the higher rates, particularly among younger men who have sex with men. It can be STDs, it can be hepatitis, big concern. But it's also the damage to the human heart, and it's the damage psychologically.
Psychological and physical damage to the human person. Sexuality is most certainly a complex phenomenon that can bring great joy, but without acknowledging that it only belongs within marriage between a man and a woman, guided by the practice and virtue of chastity, it can bring great hardship and suffering on many levels. There is no simple answer, but the consequences for acting on our desires are serious and even life-altering. Sometimes the truth is hard to face, but Jesus told us that we could know the truth and the truth will set us free. Charity, St. Paul tells us, is preaching the truth in love. In our next program, a look at the impact homosexuality can have on not just ourselves, but also on those we love, our family and friends.
Courage is a Roman Catholic apostolate helping men and women experiencing same-sex attractions to achieve peace of mind and heart and authentic relationships with God, themselves, and others. Support, resources, and people who care are available at couragerc.org and by calling 203-803-1564.